Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
I thought this was going to be hard.
Welcome to Deges and Dragons.
Who wants some of the Ripper?
Fair state champs, baby. Woo!
Smoke heroes!
He's clearly Captain Crunch. I'm a man of the people.
Shattered world.
Ripper knows! Ripper always knows! Degecast.
Welcome to another episode of the Degecast, the supplemental podcast for our YouTube show, Deges and Dragons, where we take a therapeutic look into tabletop role-playing games. Now, our second series of Season 2 is officially underway, where we play the awesomely fun game, Pugmire. Now, why is it so much fun, you might ask? Well, how often do you get to be anthropomorphic dogs on an important and urgent adventure? Now, tonight, we've got a very special episode lined up for you guys, special in more ways than just one. Well, the first reason, for the first time in quite a while, I'm joined by both of these two Deges. First, he is the permanent member of the Deges and Dragons player panel, veteran RPG gamer, and longtime Nate torturer, Tony Shermooksness.
Yo, what's up?
What's going on, man? How are we doing tonight?
Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. How about yourself?
Not too bad. Not too bad. You know, I could literally just turn around and be like, hey, Tony, how you doing? But, you know, we'll do it this way. We'll do it this way.
This is better.
Yeah, we don't have to break that fourth wall. It's fine.
Right?
Even though there's no wall.
No, there's no wall behind us. And of course, we have the Dege Master himself, our resident therapy expert and storyteller extraordinaire, Conrad Audette. Conrad, what's up, man?
Not too much. Excited to be here.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, of course, this brings us to the fourth person on your screens. He is a writer, design consultant, and game and narrative designer for video games and RPGs. He's worked over 150 books and games during his career, and he's created unique game universes such as the Realms of Pugmire, which is what we're here to talk about today. He's also worked on established properties like The Walking Dead, Mr. Robot, Futurama, Firefly, Red Dwarf, the WWE, Sherlock Holmes, and he's even won a few awards over the past decade or so. In his spare time, he advocates for the inclusion of people with hearing loss. Joining us today is the Pugmire author, Eddy Webb. Eddy, thank you so very much for your time today, and welcome to the Degecast.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
All right. Now, me too. We're definitely excited to have you. This is something we've been looking forward to for a little while now. Pugmire was, we just kicked it off. We've got a few episodes out now, and it was one of my favorite games personally. I had a lot of fun playing it. I really enjoyed being like a dog and getting into that. And, the story that Conrad crafted and all of that was a damn good time.
I always love hearing that. Thank you so much.
No problem. No problem. So, as I normally do, why don't I kick it over to Conrad to get things started?
All right. So, as Nate was saying, you've contributed to over 150 books, developed games, etc. But most importantly, yes, you created Pugmire. What's your relationship with Onyx Path Publishing, and how many people were involved with Pugmire?
Go back into the midst of time. I've been working in both the video game and tabletop industries for a couple decades now, but I was hired full-time at White Wolf Publishing back in 2007, and I worked under Rich Thomas, who long time, one of the original people started working at White Wolf Publishing back in the day. He's one of the original artists for Magic the Gathering, so he's been in the industry for a good long time. And then, so we worked together. We worked on the late lamented World Darkness MMO, which got canceled. But as a part of that, Rich went off and formed Onyx Path Publishing in 2012. I was still with what was now CCP Games, and so I kind of acted as a liaison between Onyx Path and CCP because I was one of the few people there actually understood how these weird tabletop role-playing games actually worked. So I had to explain to players, like, this is what a role-playing game is, this is how it goes, this is what you actually own, and all of that. But then on the side, also, I was helping to develop Vampire the Masquerade 20th Anniversary Edition and the spin-off books for that with Rich and that team. And then when I got laid off myself in 2014, I went full-time for myself as a self-employed freelancer. I formed Pug Steady, And then I was acting as a consultant for Onyx Path Publishing for a couple of years because Rich knew that I knew the industry. I've been involved for a while. We'd worked together in the past. So he had me on just as someone to kind of bounce ideas off of, to bring my perspective to things, occasionally to manage projects here and there that he needed an extra hand with. And then a couple of years after that, we got to talking and realized that he saw a value in having a few we call it in-house developers, developers who are full-time contract with Onyx Path Publishing to just work on book after book after book. And so that was my relationship with Onyx Path Publishing. But right before that, right when I got laid off, I had pitched the idea of Pugmire to him. And I said, I really want to do this cool dog fantasy game that's not quite a fantasy game and not quite a dog game. And he's like, okay, let's talk about it. He saw a role for that in Onyx Path, but I had, at that point in time, been working with companies like all the franchises you mentioned. And I was like, I kind of want to do something for myself. Like I love playing with people's sandboxes, but also this is my universe. I'd like to kind of, rather than sell it to a company, I'd like to kind of keep my hand in it. And so Rich was actually amenable to that, which is great. Pugmire is actually an artist creator owns property with Onyx Path. So Pugsteady actually owns Pugmire, and I've since gone off and done other things outside of Onyx Path with Pugmire. Even though I'm a full-time contractor with Onyx Path, Pugmire is still something that's creator owned to me. It's completely my property. And we have a sharing arrangements like the tabletop specific stuff Onyx Path is exclusive license for, and then since then they have subcontracted out for we have a Japanese translation. We're in the process of doing a Brazilian translation, so we have a business relationship that way. But it helps that if the person you're licensing from also is in your meetings every week, it makes things really easy. Kind of get that business synergy, or whatever buzzword you want to throw around there.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with those corporate buzzwords at all. Not at all.
Maximize our win-win potential for our good windfall.
Yeah, that was the majority of my yesterday, was sitting through meetings with buzzwords like that. But no, that's really interesting. When you said CCP, now I'm assuming that's the same CCP owns EVE Online.
Yes. In fact, White Wolf Publishing merged with CCP in 2006, and actually my first video game work was working on some modules for EVE Online. I did some quest lines for them, and then they had the rights to do, because they owned White Wolf, they're going to do a World Darkness MMO. That was in development for 5 years. That was the majority of my workload for 5 years. And then after $30 million, said, you know what, we're not going to release this and just let everybody lay it off, because that's the video game industry. That's how it works. So my wife and I were both laid off on our wedding anniversary. It was a really great day.
Things to celebrate and not at the same time.
Exactly. Well, we honestly, we saw the humor. And that's
right.
Love it or hate it. That's how the video game industry works. Right. But yes, so I did work on EVE Online. I worked on the World MMO, and then after that, I did a lot of freelance work for a variety of video game projects, as well as tabletop RPG stuff, and then my own creator-owned stuff.
Oh, excellent. No, I thought I did see something about EVE Online. Looking through your bio, and a good friend of ours is he has spent quite some time in EVE Online. I told him I'd at least bring it up.
EVE Online is a fascinating game that I will probably never play, but I am constantly intrigued by it, because the stories I hear, the things that happen in EVE Online always sound really interesting. And then I open it up and it's like there is. We used to joke internally at CCP, I think there's not a learning curve, there's a learning cliff.
Yeah, yes, there is.
Yeah, I definitely have a love-hate relationship with EVE Online for that exact reason. Like, I love all the stories and all the articles I read about what's happening within EVE Online. Like, I just read something today, there was a war that ended after 10 years. It was something crazy like that.
Is that the Goonswarm War?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just I've played off and on for years, but I just always keep up with these stories because I love it. Just it's just a space opera that's being designed by actual people. It's phenomenal. Right? I love it.
I know I've only played a little bit, and it's certainly not my style game. But listening to our buddy Josh just go into some of the stories of the wars and things that he's been in and battles and stuff. Just it's cool. It's really cool.
I've seen things, man. I've seen things.
Yeah, exactly.
Toppled a few megacorps. It's fine.
Yeah, whatever. It's like you do.
Man, he imploded one himself, but I'm not going to get far off the rails on that one there. That's a cool story though. But to get us back on track a little bit, so we're all animal lovers here, so this might be a little bit obvious, but what was the inspiration for you for Pugmire?
So for me, I've been playing tabletop games since way back with the D&D Red Box in '83. So I've been a fan for a long time, but actually the first game I played consistently, regularly, was actually Marvel Superheroes. So I never really had that experience until relatively recently of the long-term fantasy campaign. And I think a lot of designers, particularly of a certain age like myself, you get that itch to like create your own fantasy world. You want to have that binder of world setting material and blah blah. But the one fatal flaw I've noticed is that I actually don't like most fantasy setting backstory. Because to me, when I read it, it's like King blah 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 did blah blah blah, the War of yada yada, and I just don't care about any of this. But a lot of times, like, here's the 50 pages of backstory you have to read, and God forbid you go to like something like Forgotten Realms, where it's like, here's 20 years of history, just learn it. And so that was always a barrier for me. And it's like, but I still wanted that itch. So that was always been back in my head for a good long time as a designer. It's like, how can I get that feeling of the cool epic fantasy setting while also not having to do the buy-in, as it were. I've also been more of a sci-fi fan than a fantasy fan. And so, again, I got games like Marvel Superheroes, but also Cyberpunk, Gamma World was a big thing. And also, the parts of D&D I liked were always the weird late 70s, where I wasn't quite sure what fantasy was yet. And so it's like, we have elves and dwarves, but also maybe there's a spaceship in that mountain over there, and there's occasionally robots you fight. That kind of weird Wild West of we're not exactly sure what we're doing with this whole new art form we've created. So again, all that's kind of in my head for a good long time. It's like, maybe I'll get to this someday kind of thing. I think we all, as creatives, have that folder of ideas I'll get to someday. But then around right before the layoffs, around 2013-ish, I had two pugs, an older one at the time, he was 10 years old, named Murray, and a younger one named Puck. And they had to go walk, and they're just like, we gotta go. And so I was stuck in the house by myself, and I was kind of a little distracted and bored. Just like, okay, fine, take the dogs out. And so my mind started wandering. I noticed that Puck was very young and adventurous, wanted to go see things and go explore. And Murray, as an older dog, was kind of sitting back, kind of watching the young kid go, okay, you do whatever you got to do, buddy. And so my brain started going like, well, these are kind of like D&D archetypes. It's like you have the ranger going ahead and exploring, and the wizard who stays back and kind of observes things and waits for the right moments. And so I have this weird idea of like, it's kind of like marching order to a degree. And so I went back and I was like, well, that's a funny idea. And so I was like, wait a minute, can I map the D&D classes to the AKC breed groups? And so I started taking notes. I was like, actually, it didn't quite work, but it worked better than I had thought it would. And so I was like, okay, so I started kind of just, and I do this sometimes when I brainstorm, is I will just free write. It's okay, I have some ideas. And I just kind of free wrote like about 5 pages of vague story, and it was all garbage and no one will ever see it. But one of the things that I immediately kind of tapped into was the idea of the relationship that dogs have with people. And one of the things that really struck me as I was iterating on the idea, as I was playing with the idea, again, I had we were fostering a dog for a while, and his name was Vincent, and he was kind of needing something from me. And the way he was looking up with me, I realized to a moment, like, he was looking at me, I need help. I need your help. I can't do this. I'm hoping that you will help me. And I realized that's the relationship humans have with God and religion. And I was like, so we're gods to these dogs. And that kind of really snapped everything into place. So I was like, well, then if humanity existed, obviously it has to be a time period where in the future of a world where humanity is not there anymore or unavailable to otherwise act with these. And then things kind of starts to that made it to a far future thing. Obviously, there's an implied apocalypse, if not necessarily explicitly post-apocalyptic. So it wasn't a alternate fantasy world. This was our world, but in the future. And that put a whole bunch of things in them. Resonances. I also enjoy things like Gamma Worlds, but also things like Thunder the Barbarian, of what I call of bad archaeology, where characters are making good faith efforts to understand their past, but we in the modern day are going, ha ha, they got that wrong. Isn't that funny? And I genuinely find that interesting. There's also Tom Baker Doctor Who era, where Leela was like trying to understand what to her was ancient history. Was actually there were astronauts and this is all scientific equipment, but they were seeing it as magic. And though all those elements kind of got thrown into in my own head, and it's like, what if they just think it's a fantasy world, but it's actually a sci-fi world? And then that got me down the avenue of nostalgia and bittersweet memories, because these are dogs where their owners are gone. So when I was talking to Rich about it, he had this great image of the dog who sits at the front door, waits for the dog to come, or the owner to come home, but they never do. And what is going through that dog's mind, and that kind of really helps shape the undercurrents of a game like Pugmire. Is like, it can be fun and it can be exciting, but also there is an undercurrent of melancholy and nostalgia, which led me to decide to use D&D as a base because of the open game license. This is not D&D exactly. This is D&D as you remember it if you're, again, of a gamer of a certain age. I remember D&D playing like this, and actually it doesn't play like that at all. It's never played like that, but that's what your mind has told you D&D plays like. So that's all that was kind of in the back of my head in various pieces, but it was that moment of both the walk with my pugs and seeing my pugs in that avenue, combined with a desire to dig into my own frustrations with memory and nostalgia and things you could have done, because again, I'd just been laid off from what I thought was at the time my dream job, and so all that kind of came together and it really just poured out of me, and then it was the hard work of making it into a game that's actually playable and fun and interesting.
How long did that process take? How long did it take before Pugmire saw the light of day?
So the initial idea was 2013. I kind of sat on that for a bit, and then in 2014, when I got laid off, I obviously scrambling for work real fast, and so I wrote a short story for an anthology, and that's kind of was my test of the idea. They gave me the theme. I wrote a Pugmire story, and I was doing that great thing that artists always do, which is that this idea is no good. No one will care about this, and just talking myself out of this. But then the editors of the short story were like, when are you making the RPG? I'm like, okay, someone who's not me, someone who's not my family or my friends are saying it's a cool idea. So I pitched it to Rich formally, like within a couple of weeks after that. I wrote pitch documents, and within like minutes, he was like, cool, done, let's do it. I'm like, wait, what? Are you mad? So we actually started fleshing it out. I started writing pretty soon after that, and I was at the time using 3.5 D&D as a base because the 5e had just been announced, but the license hadn't been released yet. And I know this because we did a Kickstarter in 2015, and in the middle of our Kickstarter, Hasbro released license for the open license for 5th edition, so I had to rewrite my entire game that was already in the middle of the Kickstarter.
Oh, it's awful.
That was fun.
I'm sure.
So the Kickstarter was 2015, late 2015. Then of course I had to actually finish writing the book. Then going out there, I think it actually went into production. Like, it was printed in stores 2017, so it had been about 3 years. Well, 4 years from initial idea, but 3 years from I actually started seriously working on this to people were able to play it, the final version in their hands.
So
Cool.
Yeah, that's definitely interesting. And I don't know the scale of that, but even just like at that time period, trying to bring stuff from one campaign in 3.5 and translate it to 5th edition, it's like, no, like we're going to start over.
I was lucky in the sense that when I first started converting this, I was like, while I have been and will continue to be an apologist for 4th edition D&D, I was like, I was not a fan of what I saw as all the bloat in 3.5. And so I was like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to cut a bunch of stuff out. And then 5th edition came along and it's like, oh, this is 80% what I was already doing. So it was really just kind of getting it to that 20%. But one of the things I have noticed over the years is that I had to make some quick assumptions about where 5e was going as a design. And some of those assumptions did not bear out, but I inadvertently made some design decisions that are good for Pugmire, because that was my main focus, obviously. At the end of the day, it's like, I don't care what Hasbro does with their game. I need to make my game the best.
Mhm.
And so 5e's kind of over the years moved further and further away from Pugmire, but I've had plenty of people tell me that they have played Pugmire and understood 5e better by playing it because the way I explain and articulate it, and then gone back and be able to get the rest of the missing information, because they got the basics from Pugmire better, and then they were to kind of get the elements that they could from the actual core game. And a lot of that came from looking at 3.5 and going, how much of this do we actually need? And how much of this can I just ditch? And a lot of things I ditched, people were very happy about. There's a couple of things that people have since over the years been like, why did you get rid of that? But in general, a lot of it's been like, nobody uses this. I don't use this. And people were like, oh, I didn't realize that was in 3.5. It's like, yeah, no, that's the thing we just don't use anymore. So it was a challenge, but I had inadvertently designed along the same lines where 5e was going. So I was able to kind of jump that gap much easier than if I had been like a more like Pathfinder level of being true to 3.5 design.
Sure.
That makes sense. So just switch gears a little bit. Say your repertoire is truly impressive. Writing for IPs like Walking Dead, Futurama, Firefly, WWE. Previous listeners will know Nate can talk about wrestling indefinitely.
Oh, yes.
So how did you start writing for these entertainment giants?
Desperation. It started because early on in my career, I was like, I would just work for anybody. I didn't care. So in 2004, I got to work actually on the Red Dwarf tabletop role-playing game. And I knew the guy who was putting it together. I missed the core rule book, and I was like, I love Red Dwarf, so let me work on this book. And he was like, sure. And it gave me, they ended up doing a book which was recapping all, I think at that time, 7 seasons of Red Dwarf. And you kind of boil the episode down, but then like you pull out all the interesting characters, potential plot bits, and then you can so to give them to game masters, they can remix them into their own adventures. And so like, you get season, I think it was 3. And it's like, cool, great. I get to watch Red Dwarf and get paid for it. That's fantastic. And then I would see bits and pieces from other, like I knew someone who worked at Comic Images who had just got the WWE license. And so I was like, hey, I've worked at licensed games before because I worked on the Red Dwarf role-playing game. And they're like, oh, obviously you're an expert because you've done it once before. So they put me on this WWE game, and I just really started leveraging that. It's like, so I've worked on these 2 licensed products before, and then moved from there. But so some of it was just I try very hard to keep the going back to buzzwords, the networking opportunities is the buzzword, but really it's just, I like to, if there's people I enjoy hanging out with, I try to stay in touch with them, have drinks occasionally at conventions, talk about things that I love, and inevitably someone will say, "Hey, Eddie, I know you're a really big fan of wrestling. Do you want to try this out?" For example, although I can't say much about it, I've always been a huge Transformers fan since 1984, since the original cartoon, and someone knew that when the Transformers role-playing game was being developed, so I got to work on that because they're like, "You need to get Eddie on this. Eddie loves everything about Transformers." So just by being a nerd on the internet and also nice to work with tends to get me a lot of these opportunities. But it's not easy. Writing for licenses is hard work, and sometimes it's not enjoyable. It's okay. So I worked on a property called Tomorrow Nights, which was a 4-issue comic book, and it was not a pleasant experience. It was one of my earlier licensing opportunities. The creators of the comic book, again, they're creator-owned comics. They're like, we're going to make a tabletop role-playing game. They had no clue what tabletop role-playing games worked. And we got into some heated discussions. And I learned real quick that it doesn't matter what I think the game needs. It matters what license holder thinks the game needs.
Yep.
And then when I worked at CCP, when, again, I mentioned Rich Thomas formed his own company, I was the person that had to have the internal conversations to go back to licensors and say, this is what you can and can't do. So I got to really see both sides of the process. And I was lucky that CCP Legal, they really valued my input to the point where even after I got laid off, I had a short-term contract where legal departments said, please be our consultants because we have no clue how this stuff works. So I got to ask them a ton of questions about the legal considerations and what you can and can't do. So I got to understand why sometimes these idiosyncratic creative decisions are made. And again, that's really helped me to be able to go to potential clients and say, I know both sides of the table. I know what you can and can't do. I can kind of proactively anticipate what you may have concerns about. But every company is different. And a lot of that came from just 15 years of hard experience of grinding it out. So, I mean, there's no real magic bullet. It's just, you keep don't be a jerk online. Don't, deliver your stuff on time, be fun to work with, and people will keep giving you work, I found.
I mean, that's kind of my philosophy as well. And like in my professional life, just keep plugging on and the work just keeps coming, opportunities that wind up just kind of, I don't want to say fall in my lap, but like doors open that you don't really expect to open.
I mean, there's some hustle there. I mean, you do have to, go out and get it and leap on opportunities. There's certainly been plenty of times where someone will poke me on LinkedIn. And I'm like, oh, sure, I'll check this thing out. It doesn't pan out. I mean, for all of these opportunities I can list on a resume, there's probably easily twice as many of things that never panned out. Prototypes made, never went anywhere. I threw my hat in the ring for things that I never got an answer back for. So, I mean, it looks like, it's not 100% batting average. It's like it's closer to 25%, 30%. So it's a lot of it is just keep trying. So if you want it hard enough, and if you're willing to do the work to do the research and learn what the property needs and what's exciting and compelling about it, you could do a lot just by writing for licensed properties.
Excellent.
So on the game designer side, you've co-authored Vampire: The Last Vampire Masquerade 20th edition.
The last one. There have been no other Vampire Masquerades after.
None of them.
No.
You, as we mentioned, you've wrote for EVE Online, Werewolf Apocalypse, Cartoon Action Hour. A lot of these games I've personally played many hours of. And what is it about these fantasy games that you're attracted to, and specifically tabletop RPGs?
So for me, tabletop role-playing games, I've always been compelling because it's a chance to explore a wide variety of things. Like, certainly I have used tabletop role-playing games to work through problems in my life or to examine parts of my personality that I like or I don't like. Sometimes it is just pure escapism, and that's also really, really fun.
Mm-hmm.
But I think for me, the social component is a big part of it. Being able to see certain people over and over again, see your friends again, learn about them in ways, and also open up for potentially really good conversations. I remember back in 2000, I was running a Deadlands game, and one of my players was black. And early on, we had a very long conversation as a group about how accurate to the 19th century do you want to be with this. And he was like, obviously I don't want to deal with. I want to have some autonomy, obviously. So we made some decisions early on, but then one of the things that we talked to the group about is like we wanted to actually explore, to a degree, the Black experience as white players, and that was something he wanted to do. I mean, it wasn't like we coaxed him into that. It was something he proactively said, "Hey, if something you want to explore, we can talk, we can dig into this. I'm okay with that." I'm like, okay, sure, let's do that. And I learned a ton, even in 2000. I mean, and so a lot of the recent conversation around being Black in America the past couple of years has been like, not some that's not new to me. Some of it is, obviously. I'm still learning. I'm always learning. Similarly, I've had plenty of friends of mine who have used role-playing games to explore their nascent transgender identity. So let's play a character of a different gender of myself, and how does that make me feel? And so there's obviously all of those really high-level fun thing, or high-level not fun things, but like high-level things you could do that sound really cool and awesome. And you tell these compelling stories and epics, but also there is just something fun about you've had a bad day at work and you want to go home and say, I just want to kill a bunch of zombies. I don't want to have a compelling story. I don't want to have a long narrative arc. I just really want to roll dice and get a bunch of 20s and do a bunch of damage, and I'll be happy with that.
Yep.
And I think that all of those things, the fantasy part you mentioned of fantasy games is where that kind of all keys off of, because there's always that remove, right? There's always that liminal space of this is a fantasy, so we can try things and we can explore things and talk about things in a way that's safe. And then when we step back out of that liminal space outside the game, we no longer have to address it in the same way. Or we could choose to carry on the conversation if we want, but also we could say we're leaving it there. And Vampire the Masquerade, I think, was probably the first game where I really got to understand the power of that experience, particularly through live action role play, where I mainly played it, because you're now more physically embodying those characters and what they go through and whatnot. And you start to actually feel those emotional levels, perhaps a little more strongly, even. But again, sometimes that can just be I feel relaxed now because I was wound up going into that liminal space, and now I can just let it out and scream and be angry, and there's no real world consequences for those kinds of things. Or I can try things out that I say things that I could never say. So that's for a lot of it for me is the fact that it allows you to explore behaviors of any kind in a space in a way that you just can't normally do in day-to-day life.
Absolutely.
That's a beautiful answer, because that's basically like what we preach on the show all the time. That's
words.
Everything you said.
You took the words out of my mouth, Conrad. You took the words out of my mouth.
I can put the script down. Thanks. Yes.
All right. We'll send you the check in the mail.
Sweet, yeah. I look forward to the 5 cents.
That'll be about it. Yeah.
We're paying him 5 cents.
Shh. So, all right. So now this kind of, I guess, ties in a little bit to what you were just talking about. But what have you found to be therapeutic on working on these projects yourself? And is there anything that's different between an IP like Pugmire and Vampire the Masquerade?
I definitely use them to kind of exercise my own demons, as it were. But what's interesting is that it's only been relatively recently in my career that I've started to realize that. For example, I've been a Vampire the Masquerade fan pretty much since the game came out. So 1993, which is a couple of years after it first came out, I started playing. So I've been a huge fan. And then I got to work on it. And it's like, I got to work on this game I've always loved. And that's always a great moment, right?
Right.
And then I worked on Vampire the Masquerade and Requiem for a number of years, both for the MMO and then with the tabletop game. So it had been about a decade before I started seeing a trend in a lot of my work, and I realized that I had been using it to subconsciously work through my frustrations with my family's problems with alcoholism. Because it's about people that have this uncontrollable thirst, and when they take from people, it hurts the people around them, and they sometimes even damages themselves as a result of that oppressive need. And I was just like, wow, okay, well, as someone who comes from an Irish family who lost 3 people to alcoholism and 1 person to drug abuse, it's like I guess I need to get that out. And it's true. I mean, like a lot of when I was playing the game, a lot of my gameplay style gravitated towards characters like the Bruja, the Gangrel. They're very aggressive, primal, feeling, emotion-driven characters. And I always really dug the conflict of the humanity loss and the blood drinking, and to the point where outside observers occasionally were like, "You're really into this." Like I personally, as a person, Eddy Webb has 0 interest in drinking blood. It sounds gross and disgusting, and I have no interest in it whatsoever. It is the craving and understanding that is what I'm curious about. And again, it took me a long time to go back and go, duh, alcoholism. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then with Pugmire, similarly, I started working on it originally. It was, oh, hey, I have these 2 pugs, and I love them. And I want to cherish them. And then Puck actually died very suddenly at a fairly young age. He was only 6. But it was like one of those he started choking one night. We took him to the vet, and he was dead. And that's when I really ramped up the game. And again, at the time, it was I'm out of work. I got it. I just opportunity. I should start making it. It was like a year or 2 later before I realized, I was grieving. It was my way to grieve the loss of my dog. And then when Murray passed, I immediately dived into Monarchies of Mao and started making the next game. So it was a catharsis for me to kind of, here's a way to not only have my pets live again and have other people's pets live again, because a lot of people who play the game play their pets who passed on. I found. But separately, you got to play it in reverse. It's like these are dogs who have lost their humans. And so you still get to play that same emotional arc, but from the opposite side. And what does that look like? And so some of the design decisions in the game are things that at the time were like just instinctive. This makes sense to me, but I could see back, like I capped at level 10. And the design decisions for it are very sound. D&D, just about every edition, tends to go off the rails around level 11, and particularly around level 20. It just doesn't scale well. It's never scaled well. And so it's like, well, then if it doesn't scale well, just stop it at level 10. But also, it helps emulate the shortened lifespan of dogs. It's like, because a lot of people said, I started playing level 10 and I just kind of really, really getting into the character and then can't go up a level anymore. It's like, that's the dog owner experience. Yep. And that's something that once I realized that, I started really designing, not towards that, because that's very macabre. It's like, and your dog is dead. I didn't do that. But I mean, I built in, okay, well then actually level 10, you find a puppy and maybe you can pass on to the next generation, to reflect that this is meant to be a limited scope. So once I started recognizing that there were things that were threads in my work, I do try to be more cognizant of them. But I do feel a lot of times it's something you have to kind of look back on it. But it is definitely different from horror and adventure gaming, the vampire and the Pugmire poles, if you will. Because with horror, it's you want to work through things that you hope never happen or have happened and you don't want to have happen again. I've always found it paradoxical, but it's true that horror writing and horror design is, if it's fictional, if it's fantasy, then on some level your brain goes, well, that can't be real. Or that you put that liminal space on top and say, now I could cope with this because it's not direct. I'm not grieving here, I'm grieving here. Mm-hmm. So it allows you to explore those opportunities in a way that's more comfortable. And that's one reason why I think horror is so powerful and compelling for so many people. Whereas adventure gaming is much more about power when you're feeling powerless. So it's kind of approaching the same idea, but from a different perspective. It's like, what if you could stop death? If you could bring your friend back to life, use a resurrection spell. If you could defeat enemies, okay, if you could punch Nazis in the face, those are things you can do in this adventure gaming, and allows you to feel a sense of power and to help you maybe learn through ways that you can then take control of your own life. So to me, horror is a lot about letting things go and getting past anxieties and fears and concerns. And adventure gaming is like trying out patterns to gain control. And this is all subconscious. I don't feel like many people don't go up to D&D going, I'm going to figure out how to get my life together. I don't think that's how it works. But I do think people going, everyone keeps saying I'm bad with money, but I'm always really good at doing it D&D. Why is that? And why can't I just map those skills over? I think that happens on a subconscious level for a lot of people. And that's something I know with Pugmire, and I intentionally wanted to design space for that. So to roll back, one of the reasons why I liked Pugmire is that I could shortcut a lot of that fantasy preload I was talking about. In a fantasy game, it's like, this is why the dwarves hate the elves, and this is what their historical beef is. And Pugmire could say, dogs hate cats. Well, of course dogs hate cats. That's culturally, we understand that. And we understand that cats don't like mice. Okay, that's also something we get. So I can set up those dynamics very easily, and people, if you've seen a cartoon, you know what those dynamics are. And then I can build off of that foundation. So I can then do things like dogs hate cats. So this cat lives in dog society, and dogs judge it by the code of man, which dogs have created. Wait a minute, isn't that a little xenophobic? And if a cat gets arrested because they were not a good dog, it's like that's racial profiling. And so you can dig into those things if you want to. They're not on the surface, they're not there going, this is a game about xenophobia. It's not that, but I've had players start to use that as a way to dig in and find those deeper layers. So I intentionally built, once I realized this is what I was coming from, I was able to shape Pugmire to say, okay, let's leave this space open, this bottom layer, so that way if people want to dig down into it and explore it, they can. I have seen people get into the common arc for a Pugmire game I found is 30 minutes of dog and poop jokes, 1 hour of, hey, this is a cool setting, and then 1 hour of philosophical debate that is coached in stupid dog puns, but actually has deep, meaning for each person involved at the table. Because I have people walk away from the table going, I'm a good dog, and not in the haha funny, but like a realization about themselves.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm a good dog. And that's just blows my mind each time, because it's like, I can't believe that something I made is people are having that reaction to it. Because I know that's my reaction to it, but it's my thing. Of course, that's my reaction to it. But to see other people walking away with some more things, are very different things, but they're all very positive emotions. I have had people come to me at conventions who have given me hugs, crying because of what this game means to them. I'm like, this is my dumb dog game. I can't, on some level, I can't believe you have this reaction. But on the other hand, I'm proud because it's something that I wanted the capability for there to be.
Sure.
But also, if people want to just play a Weimaraner with a battle axe and beat up zombies, they can, and that's also perfectly fine. Both levels are perfectly acceptable to play. But again, yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but that's something that I learned as an artist through design, and I'm glad to see people are also finding it through play.
Sure, absolutely.
So, Eddie, honestly, my next question for you was, how do you think games can help other people? But I think you've answered that like 6 different ways already.
By giving me money, that's how it helps. By giving me money.
Conrad, never mind. I'm skipping over you.
I was going to say, I mean, I feel like this has been answered too. You're so eloquent with your speeches about really encompassing a lot of information. I was also going to ask what sets Pugmire apart from other tabletop role-playing games. And I mean, yeah, feel free to expand on that. I feel like you've also...
I mean, I did answer some of that.
Yeah.
I will say a couple things I did do from a design perspective that I think helps set it apart. One is I did try to design without the assumption of 40 years of tabletop, quote unquote, know-how. Mm-hmm. Early on, when I first did my first actually it's my second or third draft, early draft. I had the opportunity to get some playtesters together who had never played Dungeons and Dragons, and I was like, fantastic, here you go. And I got a ton of interesting feedback that really helped me shape the game. But the one that's still in my head that I still tell stories about is a piece of design. It's like they found the word hit points to be confusing because hit points are not something you use to attack somebody in combat. You don't hit people with them. So why are they called hit points? And I was just like, and I had that moment, that kind of mouth and Firefly moment of like, yeah, why is that?
Yeah.
And like I can tell
I'm going
you
through
the
that right
history
now.
of how it came out in '74 because of wargaming, but none of that matters. So it's like we should call that stamina points, and just little things like that is like there are certain ways that we've just learned how to play because that's just how gaming works, and having people go, but why is that? And sometimes the answer is let me explain that better, or let me adjust the design to take better opportunity for that. But little things like level. I tried to keep level just to character level. But if you look through D&D, the word level is used everywhere. There's spell levels, and there's character levels, and there's monster levels, and there's data type levels. And they're never used the same way. They're all inconsistent. But Dungeons & Dragons as a brand has a legacy. We've always used these terms, and we have to keep using these terms. Otherwise, it is not recognizably D&D. I don't have that concern, so I can make these changes. Say, oh well, it's called this instead. Mm-hmm. I could have done better. There's certain places where I didn't exercise as much as I could have, but that's one area. Another was experience points. It's like, why do we have them? Because a lot of game designers really move towards we've finished a story. And we're now better as a result of that. Video game arcs have really done that. There's this weird video game design kind of cycle where there are games that still use experience points, but I know on the back end, because I've seen the spreadsheets, people had designed the experience point progression so that they hit at certain story beats. And I've always gone, why don't you just give the award the story beat? You're doing this very complicated math to justify the thing you want to have do. Just do the thing you want to do. And I would get lots of stories about, well, our monetization algorithm justifies that if we do this thing, we can get this amount of return, blah, blah. And say, cool. I don't care about any of that stuff. I'm my game. I'm doing it this way. And so I got rid of experience points. I think experience points are dumb. I also, but part of the back-end design of that also is I also similarly got rid of money. And again, the initial design was I do taxes. I don't want to have to do taxes on my character sheet. But the deeper design is that if I don't get experience points or money from killing monsters, then I have no game incentives to kill monsters, which means I can talk to them and make friends with them and get the exact same amount of benefit as killing them, which changes the entire dynamic of the game. That's something I definitely want to encourage up on Myra is like, if you want to run away, that's okay. You will still get your level at the end because you had a story and it was a fun story. Go up and level. If you ran like scalded dogs, pun, you can, and that's okay. But Dungeons & Dragons is specifically a murder simulator. You kill people to get experience points and gold, to buy bigger weapons, to kill bigger monsters, to get bigger experience points and bigger gold, to get even bigger weapons. That's the design cycle. The game is built to work that way. So that's one of the things that I tried to excise those assumptions because they're not there because they've always been there. It's like, why is that design there? Why is that piece there? And then point it out because that's the story I want to tell. I wanted to have things like it always bothered me in D&D. It's like, I got this +1 sword from my father. It's this magic item. And there's this huge history behind it. Then I found a +2 sword. So we'll throw away the +1 sword. Screw all that history. But it's like, if you look at the myths and legends we're drawing from, Excalibur doesn't get thrown away because the Vorpal sword came along. Mm-hmm. Excalibur gets more powerful as the knights put faith and belief into it. So it's like, I set up so there are certain magic items where it gets more powerful if you invest your levels of experience into them. And so I wanted to reflect that kind of story. Similarly with Monarchies of Mal, there are archetypes of people who find items of power and destroy them to gain personal power and personal gratification. And so I have another thing where if you break certain magical items, then you can actually get new powers on your character sheet. So again, it's like just because that was the way it's always been done doesn't mean that it may still be a good way of doing it. I mean, I played 3 D&D games right now. I'm not saying D&D is bad by imagination. I'm saying is that D&D could not correctly emulate the kind of fiction they wanted to do with Pugmire. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do, something that felt like D&D, that looked like D&D, but actually was telling subtly different kinds of D&D stories that people, it would need to be subversive in the sense that people go, oh, I know how D&D works. And they start playing it. Like, actually, I don't have to do the assumptions I always need to do. And a different game evolves out of that. So I feel like one of the things that really sets Pugmire apart is that a lot of people, even on Path, occasionally we're like, it's a 5e game. And it's like, is it? Because yes, if you're just picking it up and flipping through it, it's a 5e game. But as people start designing in the space, I've had plenty of people emails like, oh, could you give me like a list of all the changes to Pugmire? Because I thought there was like 2, and it turns out there's like 70. I have 8 documents. I guess here's all the changes. I actually made a book, and then there's like, here I called Buried Bones. Where it's like, here's a whole chapter of all the stuff I've changed, because there's a lot of small, very minor changes, but they have an additive effect. And that's the design I love. I love the design of, let's make these small change here, and watch how all of those build up to an aggregate different experience.
That's awesome. That's really cool to kind of get like inside of a designer's mind like that. Things that, like, as a gamer that you wouldn't necessarily think of, but then listening to you talk about it, it's like, oh wow, okay, no, that all makes sense. That's cool. That's really cool. Now, kind of on building things, what is your ideal character to build in Pugmire?
It's funny you mention that, because usually my answer is that it's very rare for a designer to play their own game.
Which we're finding out. That's actually what we hear quite a bit when we ask that question.
And I'm a brief digression, but I actually asked a bunch of people about this over the years. And it's interesting because a lot of times it's well, I don't want to run your game wrong. There's fear. It's well, you're at my table, so there's nerves and anxiety about you're going to judge me and whatnot. And I was just like, it's a silly dog game. I'm not going to judge you about this. But I understand the concern. It's like, it would be like Mike Pondsmith is one of my game design heroes. And if Mike Pondsmith was like, hey, I want you to run a game of Cyberpunk 2024, I'd be like, no. So I get it, right? I get the nerves over that. But I've actually played a couple of games. My roommate, who does not care about me, was like, yeah, sure, I want to get Pugmire for you. I don't care what your feelings are. I was like, great, that's awesome. But also recently, Vorpal Tales, they did Squeaks in the Deep game. They're running it in conjunction with our Kickstarter for Squeaks in the Deep. And they approached me and was like, hey, we want to do a Squeaks in the Deep game. And in my head, I'm going, I don't know if I have time to run it. It's like, oh, no, we want you to play it. I'm like, play? What is this word? I don't recognize it. So I've now played Pugmire a few times. And I in the Squeaks game, I played basically a spellcaster. Zed had psionic powers, but he was basically a spellcaster type. And it was interesting. I enjoyed it. I had a good time. I had fun with the game. But I do find I always gravitate towards fighter characters, and I don't entirely know why. I know from a design perspective, I try to play fighters for a new game that I have not played before, because in most tabletop role-playing games, combat is the most complex mechanical system you have to understand. Mm-hmm. So if you play a fighter, you're forced to learn the most complex portion of the game, and everything else is a derivation of that, usually.
Fair enough.
On average, that is how most role-playing games are designed. So if you get combat, you get the core of the whole game. So if I know how to do fight, everything else is kind of just a variation on those core systems. But I've since found I just really enjoy it because it's kind of a pure experience to me. Everyone at the table knows what your role is. Just about every tabletop game has some form of this. I mean, whether you're playing a Star Trek game or a D&D game or Shadowrun or whatever, there's some form of, we need you to hit something. And I was like, I am the guy that will hit something. And it gives me a very clean role in the group. And also over the years, I've found there's a lot of variety inside that role that I think people don't always realize. It's like, Rocky Balboa is a fighter, but so is Jane from Firefly, so is Worf from Next Generation. These are all these same archetypes at the core, but they're very different personality types. So I do mix it up every once in a while. Like every once in a while, I'll try something different. And I had some great characters that break out of that mold. But one of my favorite Pugmire characters is I have a Saint Bernard. He's a big Saint Bernard who's trying very hard to be a good dog to earn the cask of his father so he can wear it with glory and honor.
That's fantastic. Love it. I absolutely love it. No, it's like I don't know if Conrad may have mentioned it to you. We did talk about it a little bit in our gameplay, but we actually had a girls group come up with our characters. And it was a girls. Correct me if I'm wrong, Conrad. It was a girls' anxiety group. Conrad's wife works with, and so we didn't actually get to make them, but I think it was even cooler because we got to experience these characters that somebody else made, and we put ourselves in them and kind of put our own twist on it. Mm-hmm. So it's cool. So it's kind of interesting to hear what your thoughts on your character are.
Yeah, and it's Pugmire is also interesting because again, when I made it, I was very much like, okay, people are going to make their own characters because that's how you do the role-playing games. And separately, I also realized sometimes people need help making characters. So here's some example characters. What I did not anticipate and probably should have in retrospect was the use case of people are going to say, I don't know how to make a role-playing game, so I'm just going to make my dog. Or this dog that my friend has or whatever. And I had built for, okay, a person or two want to do that. And that is by and far how most people play the game, I have found. If they're not traditional role players. And even people who are traditional role players, kids especially do this a lot, but also people I've worked with who don't know how to role play before. Like I actually got to run a game for some therapists as part of a design group, and they said no concept how to role play, and I was like, what would your dog do in this situation? And within like half an hour, she was on it, she was making decisions, and she got into it real fast because of that gap. Yep. And that was something that I would love to claim credit for. It was a complete accident. It's just how it rolled out. But I think it's similar to what you're saying in the sense that it's not a character that someone necessarily made directly. People have built up over time the personality they perceive their dog to have. And some of that is we anthropomorphize it, but some of it is genuinely something this dog exhibits. Mm-hmm. And so you're playing a character that ultimately another person embodies. So it's like, okay, well, this isn't what I would decide, but this is what my dog would do. So it's kind of same idea. It's like halfway between I completely made this character and someone else made this character. It's kind of a half step of a weirdly collaborative process between you and your pet. And you get this third concept that comes out of it. And I find that really, really fascinating.
I know, at least for me, when we first started talking about playing Pugmire, the idea of having the girls group, that came, I think, came a little bit later, having them create our characters. And I know at least when Conrad first told me about what Pugmire was, I was like, I'm totally going to role play my dog Jasper, which is a black lab that I had way back in the day growing up. I know both these guys remember Jasper, just this big aloof dog, and I was going to have him be kind of like what you're talking about, just whack things, because I feel like that would be what he does. Jasper hit, would basically be it. But so yeah, it's kind of a little, just another little anecdote kind of back that up, is that it was literally the first thing that came to my head when Conrad mentioned Pugmire. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's wild. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. That's awesome.
So to switch gears a little bit, on your Pug Study page, it says that you advocate for more accessibility for hearing impaired people in your spare time. Mm-hmm. What are some things that you'd like to see to make that happen?
Honestly, some of it is just more representation is a big part of it. I don't think you guys can see, and also if audio on the podcast could hear, but I do have a bone-anchored hearing aid. So I actually have a device attached to my head that allows me to hear. I am not deaf. I just have hearing loss. But until 2 years ago, I could count the number of protagonists in fiction who had hearing loss who were not the butt of a joke on one hand. Recently, there's been a weird explosion of them, but a lot of times, hearing loss is treated as not only a joke, but also the joke at the expense of the elderly. It is, the old man who comes in and mishears everything, and it's so funny how they heard something different, and actually they heard this, and that gets really exhausting. As someone with hearing loss, it's like, yes, it's funny, haha. I don't live that every day. No, not at all. Yep. And so it's something that I've been working towards, but it's hard because disability representation is easy for visible disabilities, right? So like, there's been a lot of conversation in the space around like the combat wheelchair. It's kind of the center point of the D&D space. And I think it's great that there's more design for these kinds of physical disabilities. And it's like, I could be badass just because I can't walk. I mean, I could still do cool stuff. That's great. And I love it. I'm 100% behind it. I've even, when I worked on Dystopia Rising Evolution, I wanted to make sure there's more visibility in that. So we got a woman in a wheelchair in that game too, because it's a game about zombies. Of course, people are going to be disabled because it's a post-apocalyptic zombie game. People are going to be disabled.
Absolutely.
That's the best place to talk about that stuff. But invisible disabilities like mine are harder to represent. And so it's something that it's been trickier to find. So I just, in fiction, I find spaces for deaf and hearing loss characters where I can. I also have both inadvertently and intentionally been a consultant on various projects to make sure that language is more inclusive and less ableist. Just little things like making sure people use it correctly, and also people don't overcorrect. There's been lots of times that people have been, well, can I use the word deaf? It's like, yes, please use the word deaf. It's fine. The only people who are mad about it are able people. It's fine. Use the word deaf. Hearing loss versus hearing impaired, little things like that, getting that kind of nailed down. And also, there's lots of small legacy things in tabletop role-playing games, if I can get 3 points on my character, if I take deaf, and it's just like, we're not a disadvantage to power up your thing, things like that to make sure that we have equal representation. And obviously I do that in my own design, but also I pick and choose. Like, not every game has to be about disability. I've had this conversation with clients in the past, like for Dystopia Rising, again, it's a game about zombie apocalypse. And so I said up front to the license holder, I was like, this is going to be pretty strongly about disability inclusivity. And if I have to explain to you why this is, I may not be the right person for the project, because I feel like you watch an episode of The Walking Dead and you should see what I'm talking about. And luckily they were like, no, that's fantastic. We were hoping you'd bring that to the table. So like, cool, great. And finding the right balance for that. Whereas we did a pirate book for Pirates of Pugmire. And I was like, I feel like I need to talk about this a little bit, because hook hands and peg legs are very much a thing in pirate fiction, which means we're talking about disability again. But if you look at most pirate fiction, particularly modern pirate fiction, it's, he has a hook hand, that's cool, but it's narratively, it does not impact him in any way. That person is just as interesting a character, and we don't go with the struggle of what it's like to have a hand missing. That's not what the story's about. So I have a little sidebar that basically going, disability is a thing. It affects you exactly as much as your character as you want it to, and no more, and then move on. That's it. So sometimes that inclusivity is just a very small, hey, we're here, and we're moving on. It doesn't need to be a lengthy explanation. And sometimes there's a middle ground, like I've been working on a new game for Trinity Continuum called Anima, which is a cyberpunk game. And one of the key pieces about that is there's a brain implant as a big central part of the game, but also there are assistive devices that are cybernetics. And as much as I love games like Shadowrun and Cyberpunk 20, 90s era cyberpunk games did this very badly. It's like, if you have too much cyberware, you're a monster, you're not human anymore. So it's like, yeah, that's going away. But this is set in the Trinity universe after a very worldwide devastating war. So it's like, it's natural that people are going to need assistive devices in this future. So I was a chance to kind of talk about it. There's a little thing about disability explicitly, but a lot of it is just people have cyber limbs because there was a war. And so it's not because it's cool or edgy or interesting. They have it because they need it to walk, and the technology is there. And then, of course, the player characters, you may have a gun in your cyber hand and whatnot, but it's because you're a protagonist. And that's why you have the cool chicks everywhere. But the bartender behind the bar, the guy on the street, they just have it because that's what they need to get by. And so that's a much more quiet representation of like anyone looking at it, go, oh, it's a cyberpunk game, blah, blah. But people like me who are seeing this going, oh, they're not doing stuff that I know is going to grind my gears. They're not doing stuff that I know is going to upset me. So my inclusivity is removing the stuff that's going to make it a barrier for people like me to see myself in that game. That's where a lot of my energy goes into, because a lot of the physicality of disability for tabletop role-playing games aren't really a concern. When I work in video games, we do get into more technical things like, here's how subtitles work, and here's why your subtitles suck, because I guarantee you they suck. Like I cried when I played Assassin's Creed because subtitles were on by default. And you have no idea how much that meant to me, because every time I start a game, I immediately have to go to options. I have to find wherever they cram the subtitle option, if it's even available, and then turn that on. And every game I have to do that. And so it's like, oh, it's already on. Well, that's cool. And they put a background behind it, so that way when you have that, flat, entirely white screen and then white text on it, I can actually read it. It's things like that that are important. Like here's subtitles, like subtitles and closed captions are different things. It's why closed captions are important. Just because if there's a sound in the game, I need to know what that sound is. So that's more specific to the video game consulting that I do, or video game work that I do. For tabletop games, I can offer advice and suggestions, but really it just depends on trying to make sure that people can physically access the table. But especially in the past 2 years, it's just frankly been less of a concern because most of us are playing digitally online. And so each person can customize their own setup to make sure that they can get all the tools they need. Occasionally it's like, okay, maybe we turn closed captions on if we're in a Google Meet or whatever, so I can make sure I caught a word that maybe I missed. But also, I have hearing aid I can tie into my computer, and so I can make sure I hear that stuff. So that's not on you necessarily to figure it out. I have my own devices and set up usually to make sure my experience is good. So in the past couple of years, it's been weird. Like that's a piece I don't have to worry about as much. I think when people start going back, they're also going to be thinking about that more because they've had to experience you're muted. Please unmute your Zoom call or whatever. I think as people had experienced that, they've gotten a little tiny bit of awareness of what it's like and are a little more receptive to, oh, I'm talking over you, because 2 years ago, oh, I'll just talk over you, it's fine. But now it's like, oh shit, yeah, it's a huge problem because in Zoom calls, talking over someone is like a big deal. So I think that the technical sides of it are getting a little better. It's something I still want to work on, but in the tabletop sphere, which is now where a lot of my energy is put, it's more just about allowing people like me to see themselves in the game, and also helping people who want to portray character disabilities do it more respectfully, do it more faithfully, but also not be afraid of it. It's like it's a complicated, muddy mess. It's not as because everyone has different opinions on it. Some people very much want to be like, I'm disabled and that's just how I am and get used to it. And other people are like, yeah, if I could get a magic spell that let me walk again, I would love that. It's a very complicated place to explore. So it does help to have people like me and lots of other disability consultants to be able to wade in and be able to say, okay, this is the things you think about and how you can address and tweak that so people can make their own decisions and not inadvertently wall off certain gameplays or certain representation.
Fair enough. That's really interesting, actually. It's like, one of the things that you obviously talking about, inclusivity and things and wanting to kind of bring to light some characters that have hearing loss or hearing impairments. It immediately made me think of another game that we're playing in season 2. It's a game that I believe he's changed the name now. It's actually called Abide. When we played it, it was called Ripe, where you basically create an older person as a character. So you've actually got some inclusivity for the elders and things like that. So you're actually trying to think in terms of somebody who's like 70, having to deal with arthritis and things like that. So it's in playing that game and having to try and put myself in actually, I think my character, I played like an 80-year-old man or whatever. I played a friend of my grandfather. I made into a superhero.
Nice.
But a lot of that is kind of what I was going through in terms of like what you were just talking about and trying to bring that inclusivity in with hearing loss in. And I just thought that was an interesting tie-in. I don't know if I have necessarily a point, but I just thought it was kind of a cool tie-in. It's something that we're kind of trying to address, obviously in a little bit of a different area, but in a different game. It's just interesting.
Yeah, and there are more games that are moving into this space specifically. Although I haven't cracked it open yet, there's a game called Inspiriles, where the magic system uses either American or British Sign Language, depending on which version of the game you want to use.
Mm-hmm.
And so you basically use ASL or BSL to cast your magic, and it helps you learn ASL or BSL.
That's cool.
And there's another one called Sign, where all the characters in the game aren't able to communicate, and so you have to actually invent a sign language as part of the game process.
Really?
So
really like
it's okay. We can only communicate with our physicality, and we have to kind of come to a consensus on what different signs mean so we can communicate to each other. And then there's also
I liked it a lot. What was the name? What was the name of that game?
Sign.
Sign. Oh, okay, that makes sense.
And there's another one whose name escapes me, but it's kind of a stealth exploration of it, where you're playing teenagers and someone in your school goes missing, so the entire game is played over text message.
Okay.
Because you're a bunch of teens texting each other about this horrible murder or disappearance that happened at your school. And again, it's a way to kind of subtly play with I want to communicate through text. How does that change and shape the role play?
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of games that are starting to move into space, which is really, really exciting. And there are more games that are coming out that are being either directly about disability representation, or at least being more inclusive of disability representation. So I think that stuff is really, really cool. And of course, obviously, Pugmire, I continue to try to emphasize and show it. But it's a whole new world. It's a Wild West because it's all new. And like I said, people like y'all have been playing for so long, and just like, oh hey, this stuff's out there we didn't know. So it's very bleeding edge, and I think it's an interesting area of the design to explore.
Excellent, fantastic.
So speaking of things that are coming out in the future, is there anything that we can expect from you for either additional content or new works that you're working on?
So yes, I try to keep it short. The shortest answer is pugsteady.com is my personal website, and that has all of the current stuff that I have out. For Pugmire specifically, I have a separate website called Realms of Pugmire, which has the core Pugmire game, has Monarchies of Mao, which is the cat version of the core game, so it's a separate core game. Pirates of Pugmire, as I mentioned, has come out where you can play lizards or birds, and you can play pirates because pirates are awesome. Each of those also have supplements, additional adventures, modules, support books. We've done even some anthologies. I've done some interactive audio drama. I just put out recently, through Choice of Games, an interactive novel with Pugmire called Treasure of the Sea Dogs. So you can play it on your phone. It's all text adventure, but like it remembers your choices, and at the end it tells you if you were a good dog or not. So you objectively can determine if you were a good dog or not. And we just wrapped up the Kickstarter for Squeaks in the Deep, which is Mice and Rats. You can play in what's called the Underneath. So it's kind of my homage to the Underdark and to the mega dungeons of like the 80s and 90s era design. but they're have magic. You have psionic powers because you are rats that follow science, and so you have to use your scientific abilities. They're not magic, even though it's completely magic in a different way. So that just wrapped up. So people should be able to get that on Backer Kit if you want to pre-order it pretty soon. And get some stretch goals out of that, including rabbit and hares. I'm going to start doing rules for those and how they relate to the mice and rats of the underneath. And then separately, as I mentioned, I'm also in the process. We're going to be kickstarting soon, TM, I don't know exact date, of Trinity Continuum Anima, which is our new Trinity game set in 2084 after the Aberrant War, where a new city has been built called Cascade. And the Federated States of America are trying to get all these beleaguered people into the city, and you only have to give up just a few freedoms for the safety and security of living in this brand new city. And everyone has a brain implant in this glass that allows them, and it does wonderful things like you can basically have a cell phone in your head, and you can see the world in different shapes. You can put your own kind of custom graffiti only you and your friends can see that's virtual, and there's a little bit of mind control, who could say? But it also allows you to tap into a massive virtual reality MMO called Terra Surge. And there's an entire separate portion of the game where you make Terra Surge characters and you actually play through this MMO. So in traditional Cyberpunk games, this would be where your kind of net running takes place. You actually go inside, you play this MMO, this complete fantasy world. And there's so you actually make an anima character who then makes an anima inside this MMO that you can then portray.
That's fantastic.
And you can level up and grind and get into guilds and all of the MMO experiences in this tabletop game. And the core of the game is that characters or players of the MMO started going missing. And so you're trying to find out what that is. And so the mystery of the missing players, you have to bounce back and forth between the MMO and the world of Cascade to find out what's really going on between the two. So
that's fantastic. That sounds awesome. I really like I really like that. Actually, I like the sound of a lot of those. But Eddy, we certainly, I think that brings us to the end of our show today. We certainly appreciate all your time. And I know you just kind of plugged a couple of your websites. If you have anything else you want to plug, Twitter handle, anything like that, where people can find you.
You can find me at pugsteady.com, Pugsteady on Twitter as well. I work all over, but theonyxpath.com is where the main place you can find a lot of my regular work. Also, I work for the companies, like I said, I mentioned Transformers role-playing game, Blackbirds, which is coming out in the future. So there's lots of stuff, but Pugsteady will keep you abreast of all of that. I have a newsletter for that. I also, with Onyx Path, have my own podcast called the Onyx Pathcast. So me and my colleagues, Dixie Cochran and Matthew Dawkins, every week we interview different Onyx Path developers, writers, other people in the industry. We talk about what it's like to make games. Sometimes we just go on 20-minute diatribe about musicals, so it's not always on topic. But in fact, we just did a 2-part series about what it's like to freelance. So going through what the freelance process is and learning how to become a freelancer in the tabletop RPG industry. So yeah, if you like more of this kind of design, nuts and bolts, how to work in the industry stuff, the Onyx Pathcast every Friday at noon. We do lots of episodes about that kind of stuff.
Awesome. I'll link that. I'm going to link that in our Discord because we might have a few people that may be interested in that podcast. So absolutely. Cool. All right. And so for Conrad, Tony, we'll say good night. Good night, guys.
Good night.
Good night.
Yeah.
All right, I'm Nate Lindberg. You can find me on Twitter at Nate Lindberg, and you can follow us at Degetime on Twitter as well. Keep an eye out for the remainder of our Pugmire series. And if you're a wrestling fan and you feel like listening to me talk over and over and over about wrestling, take a look at pwtorch.com and my podcast on PWT Talks NXT, where we talk about NXT and take your calls. Until next time, guys. See you then.